They say the lights of Paris never go out. But one September night in 2025, the French grid shook like a disoriented soul, and the source of that shaking was not Europe, but the Sahel. From the barren mines of Arlit, which once powered 70% of France's nuclear power, a decision was made: no more uranium for bandits. From Niger, General Tani's voice rang out like a declaration of war. From Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré responded with a quiet nod, as if history had just turned. France thought it had lost a mine. But in fact, it had lost an era. This is not just a story about energy. This is a battle for the soul of Africa. If you believe this truth needs to be spread, like, comment, and subscribe. Because tonight, the lamp of sovereignty has been lit in the Sahel. On September 12, 2025, the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes ICSID in Washington issued its ruling: Orano won, Niger lost. A piece of paper, a stamp, but the price was national sovereignty. France, through Orano, was restored to its $1.8 billion Sommer uranium mine. Niger was forced to cease all mining and export activities. For a moment, the dream of energy independence for the Sahel hung on the tip of the pens of men who had never set foot in the Sahara. General Tani called it occupation by law. Traoré looked further: if a court in Washington can take away Niger's mining rights, tomorrow they can take away the freedom of Africa. And that's where the story began to turn. Every revolution begins with something seemingly small, a no among the yes. Niger said no. No to Orano. No to ICSID. No to the old order that bound Africa to contracts written in blood. Uranium dust, and miners' tears. When the verdict from Washington rang out, the air in Niamey froze. Western newspapers described it as a bitter defeat for Niger. But for the people of the Sahel, it was the first spark of resurrection. Thousands took to the streets in the sand, demanding not wages, but dignity. If you think we will kneel, remember this is our land. Uranium is our blood, said an Arlit miner, raising his fist to the camera. For decades, Arlit was known as the Shadow Town. Uranium is dug up every day, loaded onto trucks, and shipped out of the country via secret routes. Bound for the port of Marseille. Billions of dollars flow out of Niger every year. In return, there are bumpy roads, dilapidated schools, and hospitals without electricity. This paradox haunts a generation. General Abdurrahman Tani, as a young officer, watched the uranium wagons pass before him. We watched them go as if we were watching our own blood flow, he recalled. But at that time, no one dared to stop them. And then, in 2023, when he and the CNSP took control of the country, the first order was signed: end the era of piracy. It was supposed to be a symbolic statement. But it was not. It was a declaration of war against the colonial order, an order that still exists in the form of energy companies, international courts, and endless contractual terms. No foreign legion landed in the Sahel this time. France had learned that modern warfare does not require armies. It only requires lawyers. As soon as Niger terminated its contract with Orano, Paris activated its legal counterattack at ICSID, a World Bank court where more than 70% of international investment cases end in favor of Western corporations. There, sovereignty is not a concept, but a number. And Niger, a country that had just regained its flag of virtual independence, was accused of breaking its investment obligations. Within months, ICSID had ruled: Niger had to stop mining. France had won. But in that defeat, the Sahel woke up. Ouagadougou, the heart of Burkina Faso, lit up that night. In a speech broadcast live on national television, Captain Ibrahim Traoré said in a calm but firm voice, "A court thousands of miles away has no right to decide the future of a child in the Sahel. Uranium does not belong to Washington. Nor to Paris. It belongs to the calloused hands that dig it up." It was not just a statement of support for Niger. It was the declaration of a generation. From Bamako, from Niamey, even from the small villages of Timbuktu, the cry of Traoré, Tani, Goïta, echoed like a chorus of the desert. A generation of young people rose up, not with foreign flags, but with their own. Commentators in Paris were puzzled. They called it African populism. But they did not understand that this was not populism, it was a revival of dignity. It was thought that colonialism ended when the tricolor was pulled down from governors' palaces. But it turns out that colonialism only changed clothes. Instead of guns, they used investment clauses. Instead of land, they used law. The ICSID ruling is not just about Niger. It was a warning message to all of Africa: if you dare to touch our interests, we will cripple your economy with the pen. But Niger did not yield. They blockaded the Somare mine. They rejected any judgment. They declared, the law cannot be higher than dignity. At a joint press conference with Burkina Faso, Traoré flashed a rare smile. If you want to sue us, sue the sun. Because the sun of the Sahel shines for itself. In Arlit, miners wearing gold masks, a symbol of uranium, held a traditional ceremony. They put their hands in the sand and swore, we will dig for our children, not for others. On social media, Sahel youth turned the hashtag Sahel sovereign into a fire that spread across Africa. This is no longer a Niger story, wrote a young man in Ghana, it is a story about all of us, because everyone has a gold mine that is being stolen. The French media called it anti-Western sentiment. But for the people, it was simply a self-awareness that freedom is not given but must be won, even against the global financial system. If you believe that sovereignty cannot be signed away in distant rooms, share this video and leave a comment. Because every time someone says no, a part of the chain breaks. 3 flags, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso. 3 nations, 1 aspiration. In mid-2025, they signed the Declaration of the Alliance of Sahel States AES, a union described as a wall of sand against reinvasion. Article 1 of the treaty reads, an attack on one is an attack on all. What does that mean? That is, if ICSID bans Niger from mining, Burkina Faso and Mali will mine instead. If France sanctions one, all 3 will retaliate. Sovereignty is no longer individual, it is collective. In Paris, major newspapers began asking, what if Niger shuts down its uranium mines forever? The answer came sooner than they expected. French nuclear reactors began to slow down. Electricity prices rose 18%. Suburban towns began to face the threat of power cuts. Meanwhile, in Arlit, once called the Dark Zone, people celebrated their first festival of lights in decades. The paradox made the world look back, it was the people who had been exploited who were enlightening. The war in the Sahel is not fought on the battlefield, but on the legal, informational, and spiritual fronts. Traoré understands that to win, the story must change. He calls not just for arms, but for consciousness. We are not against France, he says, we are against dependence. And with that very sentence, the map of world power begins to shift. CTA mid-post climax. If you believe that Traoré and the Sahel leaders are rewriting African history with their bare hands, share your thoughts in the comments. Because this is not just their story. This is the story of all those who believe that the light of freedom must be lit with their own hands. From the sands of the Sahel, a new oath resounds. We do not need anyone to light us. We are the light. And that, Paris really turned off the lights. It was once said, Africa only wakes up when there are gunshots. But in 2025, there are no gunshots. Only the drumbeat of freedom resounds from Ouagadougou, and one man stands in the desert, his eyes as fiery as the sun above him, Ibrahim Traoré. As the world reels from the ICSID ruling. As Paris is still engulfed in the darkness of energy, Traoré doesn't just speak, he acts. And what he does silences Africa. The first morning after the ruling, in Ouagadougou's National Square, Traoré appears in his old uniform, without a stage, without a motorcade. He speaks slowly, each word hitting the heart of the listener. If they block Niger's uranium, we will open our skies. If they block our energy, we will generate new energy ourselves. The words echoed across the Sahel, across borders, into every camp, every mine, every university. It was more than a statement, it was the manifesto of a reborn civilization. Because Traoré understood that modern warfare is not just about guns and bullets, but about energy and information. Whoever controls the energy controls the future. And from that day on, he began to build a plan called the Sahel Sovereign Energy Initiative, a quiet but bold strategy, energy self-sufficiency with African wisdom. Within 3 months of the ICSID ruling, Something unprecedented happened. Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso signed a joint energy treaty, combining Mali's gold mining, Niger's uranium, and Burkina Faso's solar power. They called it the Sovereign Triangle. On a map, the area looked like an endless desert. But in Traoré's vision, it was the energy core of the future. From there, they began to build an infrastructure network parallel to Europe, independent. Resilient, not dependent on the euro or the dollar. We don't need Paris's permission to light our homes, Traoré said at the signing ceremony. Every ray of sunshine in this desert is a solar panel waiting to be awakened. Those words shook the international investment world. The West saw danger, but Africa saw hope. After just 6 months, Burkina Faso launched the region's largest solar project, 1.2 megawatts, directly connected to Mali and Niger. What's remarkable, the entire project is financed without international debt, but by the Sahel Sovereign Fund, a 3-country initiative run by students, engineers and the military. We will produce electricity with our own hands, said a young engineer. No need for Orano, no need for the IMF. We just need faith. And when the first light shone on the roofs of houses in Tilaberi, an old man in Niger cried. This is our first light, not the French light, he said. While the Sahel began to glow, France was in a quandary. Electricity prices were skyrocketing. Nuclear reactors were operating at a standstill due to a lack of uranium from Niger. Le Monde ran the headline. 70% of France's electricity depends on African uranium. And today, Africa says no. Parisians began to hear a new saying in cafes. When Niger coughs, France turns off the lights. In closed-door meetings at the Élysée Palace, the French president's advisors discussed how to stabilize the situation in the Sahel. But none of them understood that this was no longer a technical or political issue, it was a matter of dignity. In a speech in Ouagadougou, Traoré announced his new doctrine. No country can be called independent if it has to ask for energy from others. That statement became the basis for the entire political philosophy of the Sahel generation of leaders. Self-reliance is the highest form of freedom. Since then, a series of technical universities have been established. Training programs in nuclear energy, mining, and mechanics have been heavily invested. The Burkina Faso government has invited Russian, Iranian, and South African experts to provide technical assistance. No more begging for aid or advice from France. For the first time, Africa is exporting knowledge upstream. In early October 2025, Traoré appeared in Niamey with General Tani. On the table, an agreement was signed, Energy Sovereignty Pact 2025. Content: Russia helps the Sahel build a $3.8 billion small modular nuclear power plant SMR, in return for the Sahel providing uranium and the right to exploit part of its military infrastructure. This is the first strategic alliance between Russia and the 3 Sahel countries, a move that has shocked Paris and Brussels. European news agencies called it a historic betrayal. But for the Sahel, it is an act of historical redemption. We are not leaving anyone, Traoré said at a press conference. We are returning to ourselves. Shortly after the pact was announced, the European Union announced it was considering sanctions against the Sahel. International banks froze more than $800 million in development project funds from the 3 countries. But what they did not expect, people poured into the streets to support. In Ouagadougou, tens of thousands of people held up banners. They have money. We have faith. France has law. The Sahel has soul. The atmosphere spread to Bamako and Niamey. In that moment, the Sahel was no longer 3 countries, but one united people. Western magazines began to talk about the Traoré phenomenon. They were amazed that a young captain could change the geopolitical structure of the continent with nothing but faith and determination. In a commentary in The Economist, a European expert wrote, Traoré did not defeat France with his army, but with faith. He turned African self-confidence into a new weapon. Since then, the name Traoré Doctrine has been mentioned as a symbol of strength and self-reliance, a concept that the whole world is learning from a land once considered the poorest. By the end of 2025, the world energy map will change for the first time in decades. France will reduce its nuclear power output by 12%. Meanwhile, Burkina Faso, for the first time in its history, will export electricity to Ghana and Togo. In Niger, the Sommer mine remains legally frozen by ICSID. But in reality, young engineers have continued to mine in secret. On the door of a uranium mine, people wrote in red paint, "If the law does not serve justice, we will serve justice." If you believe that Traoré is not just leading a country, but is rewriting the fate of an entire continent, please like, comment, and share this video to make the Sahel's voice heard far and wide. Because every share is not just an action, it is a vow. Africa will never bow down again. Today, people can turn off the lights in Paris. But the torch of the Sahel, a light that cannot be extinguished by law, debt, or fear, is burning brighter than ever. Not a single bullet was fired, but the whole world heard the explosion. A boom from the ground, from the workers in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, who once bowed their heads under the reactors of Orano, now raising their heads and shouting, "The Sahel will not sell its soul again." They had no weapons. Only calloused hands and resentment. But it was in those hands that Traoré saw the real source of energy, human energy. While ICSID shut down Niger's uranium, Burkina Faso opened its Sahel Energy Self-Reliance Program 2030. The goal, 100% domestic electricity production, using solar, hydropower, and technology to recycle rare earths, what the West once considered strategic waste. In October 2025, in the Kaya region, thousands of young Burkina Faso men flocked to an unprecedented project, the Great Sahel Solar Power Plant. Not French. Not Chinese. They built it themselves, with engineers from Rwanda, computing power from Mali, and funding from the Sahel Alliance. "We don't need the IMF to light up Africa. We have the sun, and we have faith," Traoré said at the inauguration. The word spread like wildfire across social media. Within 24 hours, the hashtag Sahel Lights Up had surpassed 50 million shares. In every comment, it wasn't just about electricity, it was about a collective awakening. When the ICSID ruling came out, the IMF thought the Sahel would succumb. But within 3 weeks, it was Traoré who launched the most ferocious counterattack. He published the White Paper on Colonial Finance, exposing more than 300 credit contracts signed by West African countries over the past 40 years, most of which contained binding clauses, tied directly to the CFA Franc and Western-controlled projects. The most shocking part is a copy of a digital agreement between the IMF and a financial group linked to former U.S. President Donald Trump to implement the Digital Dollar West Africa Plan, a plan to turn African countries into test zones for a U.S. blockchain-controlled digital dollar. Traoré exposed it to the world, calling it a form of colonialism 4.0, control not by gun, but by electronic signals. From Niamey to Ouagadougou, thousands took to the streets holding banners, "No digital dollar. No masters." Western observers called him the daredevil. But young Africans call him by a single word, Burima, meaning oath keeper. And the oath is simple: no generation of ours will have to live on borrowed electricity, on borrowed money, or on stolen energy. To make his words come true, Traoré created the Sahel Energy Security Agency (CISA), a secret alliance of military, engineers, and cybersecurity experts. They protect not only power lines, but also energy data, from theft or outside interference. A leaked document from Reuters in November 2025 shows that at least 14 cyberattacks targeting the Sahel energy system were blocked, most of them originating from servers located in Europe. Traoré did not comment. He only said, "When the aggressor cannot control the resource, he tries to control the signal." No one expected that, from the closed uranium mines in Niger, thousands of workers would become the force to rebuild the Sahel. Instead of leaving the country, Traoré and Tani recruited them to join the Freedom Construction Team, a force that would transform old mines into renewable energy centers. In just 60 days, the Arlit mine was redeveloped into the Sahel Clean Energy Technology Zone (SCET) zone. On the hot sand, solar panels reflected the sunrise, and in the distance, turbines spun in the hot wind like a triumphant march of sovereignty. A Ghanaian reporter wrote, "They are no longer digging uranium. They are digging the future." In Paris, the French Energy Ministry held an emergency meeting. Reactors began operating below capacity. Domestic electricity prices rose 12% in just 1 month. European media unanimously blamed the geopolitical crisis in the Sahel. But industry insiders knew better. France had lost its irreplaceable strategic uranium source. Washington is not standing still. A leaked memo shows that the IMF is preparing a $3 billion emergency package for African countries, conditioned on restoring international energy cooperation. Traoré flatly refuses. There is no such thing as free assistance when the lender wants to control your future. In December 2025, in Ouagadougou, a historic conference takes place, the Sahel Energy Sovereignty Summit. In attendance are the leaders of Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, Ghana, Rwanda, and the Central African Republic. During the ceremony, Traoré announces the Sahel Energy Independence Charter, which states, "No country has the right to appropriate the energy resources of another. Energy is the soul of sovereignty." The audience stands up and applauds. A Malian diplomat whispered, "I have never seen a young person who made the generals shut up and listen." From the terracotta roofs of Timbuktu to the new industrial zone of Ouagadougou, electricity was blazing. Children who had studied under oil lamps now read books under the sun, their own solar power. And in every home, a mantra was whispered that became a manifesto. We don't need them to survive. They need us to survive. Traoré took the podium at the Sahel Revolution's second anniversary, speaking slowly but firmly. The day we control our electricity is the day we control our destiny. Below, tens of thousands of young people chanted, Sahel Libre. Afrique Libre. And so, from the ashes of an unjust judgment, a fire was born. Not the fire of hatred, but the fire of autonomy. Burning away all the shackles signed in Western ink and giving birth to a new era. The Sahel is no longer a forgotten land. It is the beating heart of an awakened Africa. If you believe in a self-determined Africa, please share this article. Because as Traoré once said, when Africa lights itself up, the world will have to look at itself. Every revolution has its traitors. And when the light of the Sahel begins to shine too brightly, the forces hidden in the darkness begin to stir. In January 2026, just 3 weeks after the Sahel Energy Conference, a confidential document leaked from Brussels was titled, Green Uranium Partnership, Confidential. On paper, it was a clean energy initiative for Africa, backed by the European Union, promising billions of euros in investment. But in the small print at the bottom of the page, one reads something that sends a chill down Ouagadougou's spine. The participating countries agree to hand over environmental monitoring and mining data to the EU Green Energy Commission. Another way of saying the handing over of the keys to sovereignty, this time not through the IMF or ICSID, but under the slogan, Sustainable Development. The news spread quickly. Traoré was furious, not because of an enemy outside the border, but because someone from within the Sahel had signed off on the preliminary work. A Niger deputy energy minister, who had been trained by Orano in France, was accused of secretly collaborating with the EU to launch the Green Uranium project. At the same time, a series of social media accounts spread fake news. Traoré receives secret aid from China, Burkina Faso is bankrupt in energy, Sahel is internally rift. The dirty media campaigns were not just aimed at him, they were aimed at trust. Because the West understands, to destroy a movement, sow seeds of doubt in its heart. January 18, 2026, 22:47. A convoy of unmarked military vehicles appeared near the energy center of Ouagadougou. The guards thought it was an internal security force, but when the headlights swept over them, they realized the symbol was not from the Burkina Faso army. Fighting broke out. For 45 minutes, the Energy Coordination Center was attacked with electronic weapons, not to destroy it, but to steal national energy data. Finally, the CISA security system activated its red firewall, blocking all signals from the border. When the pursuing force arrived, they found a group of mercenaries of mixed nationality, French, Polish, and 2 Nigerian. On the shoulder of one of the survivors was embroidered the words, GUP, short for Green Uranium Project. Traoré did not issue a statement. He only appeared the next morning in a 4-minute speech broadcast live on national television. When the invaders cannot take our minds, they will use the color green to hide their intentions. We are not against the world. We simply refuse to return to colonization, even in the name of clean energy. The Sahel fell silent. In the eyes of the people, it was not just a speech, it was an oath in the dark of night. In Niger, General Tani sealed off all uranium lines and searched the green uranium network throughout the country. The result, more than 20 foreign experts were expelled in 48 hours. In Paris, the media responded in unison. Traoré turns his back on international cooperation. Sahel enters an energy dark age. But paradoxically, in the same week, France was forced to reduce its nuclear capacity by 10%. Due to the lack of a stable source of uranium. Several independent newspapers in Europe called it a self-inflicted energy nightmare. And in Africa, new hashtags blossomed. Hashtag no green colonialism. Hashtag Sahel stands. Hashtag Traoré never bows. Young Africans no longer see the West as a solution, but as a mirror reflecting the mistakes of history. On the night of January 25, 2026, Traoré looked up at the sky over Ouagadougou, where the sun still shines. Despite all the blockades. He told his guards. If they call our uranium green, they have forgotten, the blood of Africa is never diluted. And in that moment, people knew, the final battle had not yet come. But the Sahel was ready to enter it, not just with steel and fire, but with light and will. A new era awaited immediately after this storm. When the sun rose over the Sahara, the first rays of light shone not only on the sand, but on a changed era. Uranium was no longer others' gold. It had become a torch of freedom, burning in the hands of people once considered silent. Traoré stood in the middle of Ouagadougou Square, where thousands gathered, holding aloft the Sahel One Energy symbol. No more banners pleading for help, only words of affirmation.